Gothenburg. And I know a lot about his personal charities and other things. I will not get into it. I will straight away hand over to Shubhashis. And after he finishes talking, we have the very eminent Anil Padmanabhan, who has been a journalist for the past 34 years, most recently as the managing editor of Mint. So with that brief introduction, may I hand over to Shubhashis Gangopadhyay for his remarks.
Thank you, Shubho. Thank you, Ajay, sorry. And thank you to PAFI for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about my budget expectations. So please be careful. This is my wish list. We all have our wish lists for the budget. How much of it gets addressed is a different matter altogether. So I'll be talking about what I think we need to do given where we are today. Humans are eternally hopeful. So I would like to first say that unlike Ajay, I'm hoping that the next fiscal would be a COVID-free year and that we will start getting back to where we wanted to be 2-3 years ago. I say where we wanted to be 2-3 years ago because remember, we have to first recover and then get back on the growth path that we had. So my first, I would first like to emphasize on something that I do want to see in the budget, which is job creation policies. Not only have we lost a lot of jobs during the COVID era, we have also not been creating sufficient number of jobs even before COVID. And therefore, what the COVID did to us is sort of wake us up from the complacency that we were in terms of job creation. I do hope that this knock on the head would make us focus on job creation. And for me, the job creation will only happen if there is a huge boost in demand and in investment. So we can discuss in detail what could be the possible instruments to use, but whatever is being done should be aimed at creating domestic demand and also domestic investment. Why do I say this? I say this because there is a lot of focus on manufacturing. People, by focus, I mean a lot of talk on how to improve or increase manufacturing output. I'm a little bit skeptical of that because the era of globalization that started about 15-20 years ago is now coming to a head, right? And we are probably not going to see this continue for some time in the future. First, because as you can see, there is a lot of trade protectionism that is happening throughout the world. So our idea of becoming a global supply chain, since things are moving out of China and all of that, I think could end up as a pipe dream. Not only because of our own inabilities to make our infrastructure, our frictions in the marketplace in terms of land, water, you name it, environment. Not only because of that, but also because the world is looking more and more inwards. So that's why I'm focusing on our domestic demand, of which there is a much larger scope. There's a much larger scope of improving our domestic demand. On the other hand, if we do want to focus on anything, I hope that we focus on some things that strategically is ours, in the sense that there will be no competition in those things, which are, of course, health, education, tourism. Right? So these are, as you see, the health has huge ramifications, including for manufacturing, including for high tech, including for the data economy. So health in that sense is the #1 priority for me. I do hope that something is done for the health sector as a whole, not just bits and pieces of the health sector, but strategically. I hope that the budget looks at the health sector as a possible engine for recovery. And the same with tourism and the same with education. because these are areas which cannot be taken away from us. So strategically, we should start focusing on them. The other two things that I hope to see in the budget, there was a talk of monetizing assets. And this is not just privatization, but I do hope that we monetize our assets on a much more aggressive form, because we are going to have deficits. I don't think we should be looking at, curbing expenditure or, and I'm here going to be a little bit controversial maybe, especially in a business gathering. I don't think taxes should be cut, because it is true that salaried people are facing a lot of problems. But please understand that there is a large number of people who have lost their jobs. So I think we have to keep our priorities straight. Those who are in jobs, yes, they are also facing inflation. They are also facing a lot of stress, COVID-related, health-related expenditure and all of that. But we have to get our priorities straight and first worry about the most vulnerable people who have lost their jobs. And these are not people who, as I said, they're vulnerable. These are not people who are wallowing in huge salaries. So, our priorities should be not to cutting taxes or reducing expenditure. On the other hand, we should try and monetize the assets to generate resources and make the public sector, of course, work more efficiently and all the usual stuff that we promise every year to do. Finally, again, to boost the economy and to bring about less distortions or reduce the distortions in the economy, I seriously think that there should be some thought on GST reforms. They are too complicated as of now, creates a lot of hassles for people. Every month is a big hassle for the small players, but it has to be done. And the differential rates, which always enables harassment. So all those things have to go, and we have to rationalize the GST. In other words, I hope that the COVID experience has made us, take a relook at what we were doing. That business as usual, responding to band-aids all the time. Somebody has a problem, reduce taxes. Somebody has a problem, throw some money at them. Instead of thinking that way, to think strategically over the next 5-10 years, where do we want our country to be? What are our top priorities? Like, as I said, job creation, health, in education. These are our top priorities. If we do not invest in the most plentiful resource that we have, which is the youth, the young resource, if we are going to neglect them or continue to neglect them, we will never be the leaders that we want to be. So I would stop there saying that I do hope that we have a fresh look at the usual policies that we were doing and wake up after the COVID experience. I'll stop there, Anil.
Thank you, Shubhashis. Before I just come to you, thank you, PAFI. Thank you, Ajay, for having me here. Shubhashis, I'll just jump into questions at my end so that we also leave some room, some time for other colleagues to join if they want to. You mentioned right upfront that we need to step up investment and we need to improve demand. Now, my question to you is, which you had itself suggested, how do you go about this? Because last year, capital expenditure was bumped up in a record manner, but we have found through the year the spending has not happened. So you have that for some reason. It could be partly because we lost a few months due to COVID, but it's not just that. At least I don't think so. Then the other side, the demand, what you said, has shrunk very dramatically. There are lots of new poor out there, and I think we don't even know the extent of damage to the social and economic fabric at the bottom of the pyramid at this stage. We're just guessing. So how do you address both these issues? There seems to be some spending issue on investment, even if you bump up the numbers. And on the demand side, how do you rejuvenate it in such a quick period that it starts to manifest in the economy?
Well, first, that's the sort of new thinking that I was talking about, right? since you have put your finger on the fact that even though expenditures had been promised, the actual implementation of expenditure has not been undertaken. So that's what you do, right? So you make sure that administration works towards, living up to those promises. Now, remember that if money starts flowing into the hands of those from whom money has gone away because of COVID, the first thing they will do is not save. The first thing they will do is spend. See, one of the big problems that we had earlier when we were trying to come out of the COVID in the first round, 21 or 20, end of 2021. See, we started opening up lines of credit, easy loans. But, especially the small players, no small player in their right mind is going to start production unless they are sure of demand. And given that there was no demand, these loans were useless, meaningless. So I hope that that's not what they do. They actually make sure that there is money to be spent first, before new money can be generated or production activity can take place. So that is how the focus on demand improvement should come. To get the money to people who will spend the money immediately, not hold on to it. As for investment, that's a much more difficult problem, because there the private sector has to be galvanized, and they will only be galvanized again if the economy is on a growth path. And therefore, the first step has to be taken by the government. And that's why I talked of monetizing, dead assets with the government, which are not dead actually, they're extremely good assets, but they're not being put to use. So monetizing them would be the thing to do. The government has to step in, and government will crowd in private investment. So the government should continue to spend on infrastructure, continue to do, we need a lot of capital reconstruction and new construction for the economy as a whole. Remember, we have no hospitals, we have no schools. There is a lot of things that can be done. Whenever we think of investment or government investment, we again think along the usual lines, right? And in the usual lines, if you look at the statistics around the world, India, we say that we have too much government, too much government, too much government. That's a lie. That's a blatant lie. We have too little government. We have no teachers in schools. We have no police in the police stations. We have no doctors and nurses in the government hospitals. But when I say we don't have, I do not mean that the government is trying very hard to recruit them. There are huge vacancies in all these places. We need to hire people here. That's what the government needs to do. That's where the government needs to spend. That's the new thinking that has to come in. We have 2.3%, at most 3% of the people who get us a government check, right, as salary. Even in the US, it is more than 8%. And in European countries, it is 14%, 15%. We have a very, very small government.
Shubhashis, we'll come back to health, because I think it's a very, very relevant subject you have flagged. But I just want to deal with the macro numbers before that. You bump up expenditure, the revenues are picking up, but they're certainly nowhere near where it should be. And that's primarily because growth is not there. I mean, the kind of momentum we really need to generate the kind of revenues they desire. So it comes to the obvious thing that the fisc, there you're right, if you monetize these assets, you will release some precious resources. But assuming we don't see it, because there's not so much appetite for monetizing these resources, and it's not easy because it's the first time that something of this scale is being attempted. And we know how government ties itself in knots when it comes to these big ticket decisions. So what happens to the fisc? Where do you stand? Do you think the fiscal deficit should be relaxed and the gap year that we have seen should be extended? Or should the FM get back on the fiscal rails that she said she's not willing to part from?
I was hoping you would not ask me this question because I have been an ardent, I've debunked these deficit discussions for a very long time, even when it first started. Because let's look at our country, right? In our country, the government has to do a lot more things. It's a chicken and egg sort of issue, right? Or we have made it into a chicken and egg issue. We are not going to spend because we have fiscal deficit. If we don't spend, we are not going to raise resources to be able to spend. That's the situation we are in, right? So somebody has to cut through this. And the responsible government alone can do this. We can go on screaming. Recall what happened in 2008. All the countries that were telling us to reduce the fiscal deficit, suddenly thought that it was okay to relax that. It took us 2 years to figure that out. That, oh, acha, now we can also do it. So we have to stop listening to what others are saying. At a time when we were being pressurized, reducing the fiscal deficit, there were economists going around in India saying that China only has a 3% fiscal deficit. Not realizing that they were funding all their infrastructure through NPAs in banks, which are all controlled by the state. So we have to do our homework a little bit more now instead of taking up these stances. The more important question to ask is wasteful spending. That should be stopped. But there is no talk on that. Right? Everybody does lip service to this and goes on to reduce fiscal deficit. If when we are trying to recover from COVID, if that is the first thing we are going to talk about, then it's not going to work. I think we should stop discussing the fiscal deficit at least this year.
Okay.
I'll give you to make it. I want to make a strong point on this. So let me give you a very strong pathological example. Today, if there is a foreign enemy, I don't want to mention names, attacks our country, will we say that we are not going to divert resources or make any extra expenditure because we have a bad fiscal deficit? We are in that situation now. What has happened post-COVID with the job situation, with people losing their jobs, people going back home? We are in a serious state. So we have to take it at that level of thinking.
Fair enough. Actually, the FM keeps an eye on it because of the rating agencies' pressure, and the same IMF, which is telling us today it is okay to breach the fisc, will flip immediately and turn around and say that there are issues with your growth strategy, not sustainable. Anyway, let's leave that. I think I have a point taken that this year the FM should forget about the fisc and focus on growth and reviving the economy the quality of growth is also very important. There's a subtext to what you're saying. I want to go back to health and education, the two things you flagged. Absolutely. I don't think anybody in India in their sane mind will question what you're saying. But there's a problem here. Okay, there's a legacy of deficit. I don't want to dwell on it. It's well established. Second, both these areas fall in the state's realm. Okay, so now problem is like in a family, all our states are not equal. So like all the siblings are not equal, all the states are not equal for whatever reasons. Whether it's geography, whether it is legacy, whatever reasons. So, and the two biggest, most populous states are the ones really struggling, which is UP and Bihar. And so you have, Bihar, the poverty from the new Niti Aayog numbers is 54%, which means 1 in 2 people are poor. And it's a little better in UP, it is 40% or 37% or something like that. And by the national average is 22-25%. So health and education, it has not been fixed for so long. It is not a question of amount of money you spend. Again, we are going back to the quality issue and deliverables. So how does a budget, the budget can at best ramp up numbers, say I'll share more money with the states. But the last mile about how do you get states to actually execute a lot of these things, how does that happen?
Well, that's a very good question, and indeed that has been one of the major reasons of divided responsibility, right? That especially in health and education, as you correctly said, that finally it is the states that are responsible for delivering both of these two. Now, the thing is that let's look at some of the things that we have done. We started with RSBY, right? So the first question we need to ask is, do we want universal health or not? Second question we want to ask is, if we want universal health, how are we going to deliver that? Right? We cannot answer either of the two questions without considering them together. That's the first, problem that we have. Look at the way, we have invested a lot in medical colleges, medical hospitals, right? In nurses training and all of that. What is happening to that? Everybody is leaving. We are using taxpayers' money to train doctors and nurses, and they're all leaving the country. Now, do you want to hold them back? Absolutely not. You want to create job opportunities for them so that they stay back. Right? So that is where the central government support can come in. So the central government has been doing various things on, be it highways, be it Aadhaar, be it everything that they have been, giving SOPs to the state governments to do it or else, do it or else, do it or else, right? Both health and education are near fundamental rights of the people, and that the central government has to look after. So they need to work out these strategies. That's what I'm saying. We have to think differently.
So second point I think you're making is that there needs to be really out of the box thinking going forward, given the current circumstance. Not just COVID, whatever things we need to fix are not going to be fixed unless you have an out of the box thinking. Business as usual won't work. Shubhashis, there's a question which has come in which segues with what we discussed a minute ago on capital expenditure. So this is from Deval Sood. He's asking that on the theme of enhancing capital expenditure, where do you think the expenditure should be directed most? Should we look at smart cities, urban rejuvenation, digital India, roads, Sagarmala, etc.? What is your take on the implementation of these flagship programs, and what should be the priority?
See, again, on this, one needs to have a lot of information to be able to pass judgment, right? But so given the limited information that I have now on what the government is planning or what the situation is on the ground in various aspects of it, so I will say the following thing. We do not understand smart cities, right? The smart cities should be focused on the citizen. The citizen must want to be in a smart city. The citizen's daily life must be made more simple and easy. A gated community city is not a smart city. I don't care how much digitalization you do in the life of that city. So I think this is again, we jump into things without realizing, what is it that we are trying to do. So I would say, don't, spend money on smart cities. If health and education are state subjects, why is urbanization a central subject? Right? We should ask ourselves these questions. If we gladly, give up responsibility by saying health and education are state subjects, when was urbanization a central subject? So I don't think that's where we should spend money, right? When infrastructure, absolutely, but the infrastructure is beyond roads and highways, right? The overall infrastructure, today we are getting more and more digital. And, therein lies a lot of our abilities to grow. So we need that infrastructure straightened out. There's a huge, lack in that infrastructure. So I can say what should not be done. Then I can, but of course, the nitty-gritty details, I should not be discussing those because I don't have the right information.
Okay. Just moving on to the GST, you said there's a need for GST reform, but there's a problem here. It's not something the budget can address because it's in the GST Council. But having said that, What is
Most
the
of
kind?
what the budget says is cannot address. I'm saying I want to hear it. I want to hear it in
You
the
think
speech.
the signal? You're saying basically the
Yes,
signal.
yes, yes.
But that she has already said that there is a need to reform. There's a subcommittee of FMs looking at this. Basically, the slabs. They want to unclog the
Rationalize.
mess they've created with these zillions, which is basically excise in a new form. I mean, everybody in this room will validate that off the record. So the question that is asked is, I mean, I also asked, and Rahul is also added to it, is that given the state of the kind of love fest happening between center and non-BJP states, so what is the what is the expectation, real expectations of one getting some consensus on GST reforms? And as Rahul rightly says, the compensation cess is poised to expire, so you need to extend it. And at the same time, there's this big demand for bringing petroleum products under within GST. So should the reforms be packaged to include all of this?
Well, again, this is a matter of detail, right? Which requires specific information, which I do not have. So, but the point that you made about rationalization, I think the reason why I'm saying, talking about giving out this signal, you're all businesses here, right? I mean, businesses need to be assured of things, right? And the government should be sending out signals that it is trying to work these things out. Business has been complaining about this complicated GST setup, right? And it really causes problems for them. So why can't, at least signals be given out?
So talking of signals, Rakesh Tukral has asked a question that what is the signal the budget can give in terms for FDI? Because that's a very important resource flow. So what is the kind of signal the budget can give?
See, the thing is that please remember that FDI is not going to rush in because of any SOPs. If Indian producers are not investing, why would a foreigner sitting somewhere else say, let's go and invest? Clearly, their businesses are not investing. Will they never think that why are they not investing? They must have some information we don't have. Come on, what is it? Why do we always raise this issue when our own investors are not investing? Why would the foreigners come and invest? You can keep on giving SOPs. Yes, something will come in and we will rejoice every year it comes in. But that's not a development strategy. No? Look at the way the Chinese did it. For them, it was a strategy. But they didn't have domestic businesses like we do. Why shouldn't our strategies be on our domestic business?
Well said, because Ajay has even written about this in ET, where he said that you should roll out a red carpet for domestic industry first. Yes. Charity begins at home, So I think he will. Ajay, you want to step in briefly? And
no, I just want to thank Shubhashis, because it's all investments are important, but I find that sometimes states in their zeal do not recognize and do not capture the extent of investments happening domestically. What I mean by domestic investment does not mean by Indian industry, but industry in India, both foreign and Indian companies who are in India, who are further investing, does not get captured fully in the celebrations of investment, so to say.
But having said that, it's also a fact, like Shubhashis is pointing out, for the last 10 to 15 years, India Inc. has taken a large gap decade in terms of investing. So that's also a reality.
But Anil, if I may say, that we have to stop doing this. There is something, there was the professor I met from Sweden, and I was sitting and talking to him. And he said, why are you looking so despondent? This is in the early 90s, after we have just reformed. He said, why are you looking so despondent? I said, no, because, impatience, right? Something is happening and not happening. So he said, and he was much senior to me at that time. I was young at one time, talking about that. So he said that Don't be so cynical. Don't be so despondent. Let me tell you. So he said that Sweden in the late 1900s and early 20th century was exactly like we are today. And he started reading off data, right? Network economy, elite, highly social, tremendous social hierarchy, lots of corruption, right? A total breakdown. So the king called agriculturalists, industry, and government together and said, Russia is going to attack us. Gave them a common threat and said, get your act together. And he said, look where we are today. What we need is stop pointing fingers at India Inc. or labor. And that is what we do all the time. We find a person to blame. That is the extent of the homework that we do. We are all in it. We believe in a market economy. Why would India Inc. invest? Right? Or why would people put their money in India Inc. to invest if they don't get their returns? So we have to understand why they are not investing. And that is the new thinking. There is no point, like we made a CSR law. You have to stop thinking in these manners.
Okay, point taken. So, but I'll continue to be critically appreciative of everyone, including Indian industry. So, coming to
Oh, no, I can find lots of criticisms for them. So, right? For example, our IT industry, which has, I know there are IT people here, the IT industry, which has been doing great things, right, in India. Why is it that every IT employee wants to get out? They go on the foreign visas and never come back after that. We have to ask ourselves this question. We, revel in the fact that the IT turnover is huge of employees. Human capital does not get built unless the human capitalist invests time and effort. If the human capitalist is interested in jumping jobs, then the human capitalist is learning nothing on the job. We have to understand all these things. That's what I mean by being citizen-centric.
Okay, so Ishtiaq has a curveball for you. So he's saying that globally, surveys are showing that sovereign debt crisis is imminent for most countries in the world. So, given India's big push, like you rightly said, there is desperate need to push up spending. Plus, we can throw in our populist politicians who are offering free power and free everything to everyone around to win votes. His concern is that do you think India will run into some kind of debt challenge?
No, I don't think so. India has historically had low debt to GDP ratio, right? And ours is still well below the mark. Yes, we have increased our debt to GDP ratio over the last 2 years, and that is understandable. But if you look at the projections, they're already turning down. So I would not be too worried about it. And again, it's like the question to ask is, can we service the debt? Do we have those plans? Not how much. Because remember, the debt to GDP ratio is just a signal. But it's not just as the fiscal deficit is just a signal, and then we need to go inside it to see. So that is what I would say.
So there's Chandan is actually differing with what you said in your opening bit, where you said that very precious little was done for MSMEs. So he's pointing out that RBI had guaranteed, the balance sheets using its own leverage and its own balance sheet to help guarantee these borrowings. And he says that helped. So he's asking, should we not, while you do capital expenditure, should this be again pursued should we amp up this kind of strategy?
See, the question to ask in public policy is the following. Should the RBI, if what the RBI did, if it has helped the MSMEs, shouldn't the RBI continue doing it? Or Did it help the MSMEs? Only because there was COVID. Now, if you look at what the RBI did, I don't see any reason why it should not continue doing it. MSMEs are stressed with or without COVID. The only thing that we have to worry about is that are we picking the right MSMEs? Are we designing the public policy in such a way that the good MSMEs come out of it? Right? So that is the thing to think about.
Now, there's a question from Malika Sridhar. She's asking that, is our national budget green enough? She said the allocations were actually reduced last year. So what should be the renewed focus, particularly in the light of the PM's COP26 remarks and then World Economic Forum last a few days back? He again emphasized the green aspect. So the question is, how do you address this? How do you get a green budget in place? Walk the talk, as it were.
Well, again, I'm not an expert in developing a green budget or converting a budget into or checking on its color on the spectrum. Requires a lot of expertise. I have worked with some people on how to develop indicators for whether we are moving towards a greener economy or not. So based on that, I will say that there are two things I would like to say about the green movement within India or the environmental movements within India, is that we have to focus on local environments a lot more than global issues. Because this cannot be, we cannot become green with a danda on our head. To become green, people have to participate, businesses have to participate, they have to want to develop greener technologies, right? And for that, there has to be a carrot at the end of it. And that is what the government should be doing. In the meantime, it can keep measuring whether we are moving towards that, whether those carrots are working or not, do we need to tweak them or not, right? All those exercises can be done. And therefore, a green budget, even if it is not done properly, the activity should start. And we can keep, look at the European countries' ESG experience, right? They started entirely exploratory. When they started, it was all exploratory. Slowly, it is happening, right? We should, again, because that's a strategic move.
Shubhashis, are you there? You're frozen on us. There may be a network issue.
Yeah, I'll just check.
You may have to log in again.
Yeah, I'll just check. Yeah, he's just logging back, folks. So please stay on.
So there are chat questions too. I just missed them, but I think everyone's copied it very nicely on the Q&A. I'll just come to them. But lots of questions. So
It's good.
yeah, I have withheld mine. So I think should get these addressed.
Anil, till Shubhashis comes back up, let me ask you a question. Do you think this budget will be a lot more political because of the coming elections, or it will be more economic? Oh, Shubhashis is back.
So I've been saved by the bell.
But you can still answer before Shubhashis.
No, I think the question I'll deflect it to Shubhashis. It's a good question. He's asking that what will be the ideology of this budget, given will it be more of politics, less of economics, given that we are hitting a big election cycle, mini election cycle?
See, I always tell my students that these are vicious, that good economics is bad politics, good politics is bad economics. These are all cliches, right? Public policy is neither economics nor politics. It's both. And not just economics and politics. It's a lot of other things too. So we should not look at public policy through the lens of an economist alone, right? To give you a very simple example, if I'm a local leader and I have money to build a road, right? I will ask the economist to give me the most cost-efficient way of building the road. And the economist says that the best way to build the road is to have heavy equipment, right? Which will mean less employment. The political scientist will say, by job creation, do use less equipment, use people instead. Both are right. It is up to me to decide what policy or what mixture will I do, right? So we have to understand public policy is not the economist's viewpoint. No? So once we understand that, today, I think in the budget, ideology is a very bad word to use in for an economist. If I think we are all focused on recovery post-COVID and getting people who have lost their jobs back into the workplace. And I think on that, nobody will, say no to that. They can add on other priorities also. But these two, I think, are our top priorities.
Shubhashis, we have a question from some anonymous attendee, but no sweat. It's been echoed by Anubha Taneja. It's about, they're asking about what do you think specifically you would recommend for tapping the youth power that you said, you said, let's not disappoint India's youth. So what can the private sector do to address their expectations?
Well, this again, I've been wanting to say this for a very long time. So since I have you as captive audiences, let me say this. Businesses have been complaining about the lack of skill, right, for a very long time. When I look into the data, I don't see increase in wages. All my economics goes out the window immediately, right? Because when there is a shortage of something, we expect its price to rise. But that is not happening, so I don't know. Is it because of the technology that we're using that doesn't require labor? I think it is. So what we really need to think about is how to train our youth. Our youth are highly untrained. They're not job ready. Right? Now, if you ask the government to make them job ready, it will not happen. The question to sit down and think is, how do we make sure that if I'm a business who is training somebody, after the training, the person doesn't walk away to my competitor, right? That's the real fear. This cannot be privately solved, right? This has to be solved collectively. So here is where the government needs to step in. It needs to take the business along with the government so that it can design a mechanism. Just think about how the higher education system was designed. It had performed reasonably well, right? Similarly, we have to get the youth trained, not only to do PhDs. If you think of many other countries, plumbers, carpenters, they earn oftentimes much more than what a PhD earns, right? As an academic. Why can't we be that country? See, our trained, just imagine what happens to a skilled carpenter, right? Sitting in Bihar. Nobody knows that the carpenter is skilled, excepting the labor contract. So all the premium on his skill is extracted by the labor contractor, not by the skilled person. So why would anybody invest in skill? Long ago, and Ajay will recall this, maybe even Shubho, at General Mehta at CII started this skill training institution and went to various companies and told them that we will train, but you say that you're only going to use certified labor. So businesses need to think about these sorts of things, right? Because if that becomes a necessity to get the job, then the labor contractor is also pushed out, as well as the people who want to get skilled. There are people who spend huge amounts of money to get skilled, right? My work in Odisha and was amazing to see how much the people spend, poorest of the poor spend to get these skills. But because there is no process of certification, and because the businesses, I cannot start teaching in a university without a PhD. So I'm forced to get a PhD, right? So similarly, businesses say that they're only going to take as an electrician in their construction business, those who have gone through training and not somebody who's learned at his uncle's feet, right? Then it will start. So it's those sorts of things that need to be done. The financial resources have to be put up by the government, just as it did for education.
So the subtext of what you're saying, Shubhashis, is that everybody has to be a stakeholder in this. It can't be outsourced to government or to India Inc. So all of us, including us. Great point. There's a question from Vandana. She's asking whether the proceeds from the LIC IPO, which is likely to happen next fiscal, will help, the FM in terms of extra resources.
Well, that's a privatization issue, right? So there has been, the question is, what should this be used for? Right? That's the question being asked. This is an old debate. I don't want to get into it. In fact, one of the interesting things in India is that if you look at our debates on privatization in the 70s, right? You can go back to the literature and see. It's exactly the same as we're having now. So you use the money in whatever way you like, but just make good use of it.
Yeah, no, I think she's asking in the fiscal math, can the FM expect this cushion in the next fiscal? So in that sense, she may have to borrow less, that's all.
Yeah, so and as I said, right, monetizing assets should be one of the things that I expect to see in I shouldn't say should be, that I expect to see, is one of the things I hope to see in the budget. An actual implementable plan on how to do it, not just words.
There's a question from Yashika, and she's asking whether, in the light of these raft of FTAs that are being negotiated between India and various countries, will there be a rationalization of the tariffs, particularly the customs duties under FTAs? She's asking under FTAs, but I presume she also means regular customs tariffs. Will there be a rationalization to expect in this budget?
See, rationalization of tariffs is independent of FTAs or anything, right? That's a general principle. Why shouldn't tariffs be rationalized? The thing that I would like to reiterate is that we are in a situation where all the other countries are looking inwards. So India is facing a trade situation which is much worse than it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. So that has to be kept in mind. And all these FTAs are actually, again, this is because of maybe my economics training, because I know that many economists do not agree with me. Many economists do not agree with me, forget about others. But these regional FTAs and bilateral FTAs are actually bad for world trade in the long run, unlike the WTO. So where everybody was a partner, so that you weren't restricted, because it creates, if you have different trading groups and different rules and regulations across those trading groups, you generate a lot of distortion. Exactly as many GSTs create a lot of distortion. It's the same, the economics is the same, whether you're doing it across boundaries or within boundaries, right? The basic distortions that arise because of regional trade agreements. Many countries gain, but the world as a whole does not. And India has to be part of the world as a whole because our presence in trade is very, very small, right? So we are what we call a small open economy. And for the small open economy, it is very bad. If two countries which are both large in economics terms, and they are trading with each other and forming FTAs and all of that, it helps.
Okay, this is the final question before I hand off to Virat. The last year, the FM head of the budget gave it a moniker. She called it a once in 100 years budget. What is your moniker for this year's
Once
budget?
in 100 years. Because last year it was presumed that COVID will not be there anymore. We are in exactly the same state today.
So
So
you're
there is
saying
no reason
twice,
for the moniker to change. Yes.
so twice in 100 years. Okay, get
No,
it.
this is a once in 100 years budget.
Fair enough. So fair point. Okay, so Ajay, it's Virat, right? I have to hand off to Virat.
Yes.
Yeah, unless I think anybody else has, I think Deepak, you had a question to ask?
Oh, sorry. Deepak had a question. I'm sorry.
Let
Sorry,
Deepak
I
ask.
Yeah. So he won't. Sorry, you go ahead, Deepak. Why don't you ask yourself?
So my question is, was about like right now we do not have a chief economic advisor, and under these circumstances, how important is the economic survey actually going to be in terms of long-term policy making?
Well, the economic survey is on the state of the economy, right? And that activity takes place independent of the budget. And that's why you see, especially in the last few years, and not only the last few years, also in some earlier years, you see a difference in approach in the survey as well as the budget. So one should look at the economic survey not in terms of the policy changes that will happen, but in terms of where the economy is.
Shubhashis, I find that economic survey is always like a music to your ears. It has
That's right. That's
all-
what I'm saying. Right.
But there's no connection with the budget. What do we do to sort this thing out?
Well, because as I said, the chief economic advisor's job is to look at it as an economist. The government's job is to look at it as public policy.
You know, I remember there was this so-called railway budget, and one fine morning it just disappeared. So do you think, because in other countries we don't share such a halabula around the budget. So do you think that will ever happen in India?
Well, as long as you hold these meetings every year and TV channels gear up for this, and we need to be on TV, this will continue now. This is a good tamasha that goes on every year, but I agree with you entirely. For a transforming society, you don't plan by the year.
Yeah. You know, one fine morning, the railway budget just disappeared, which was such a great thing this government had done. So,
And no trains have stopped because of that, as you noticed.
Or slow down.
So I think we will move towards the end before we request Virat, unless you want to have any closing remarks, Anil.
No.
Anil?
I've vented all my feelings.
Actually, I had a question before I get to the closing. You talked about domestic demand with a great deal of passion, and you talked about FTA, so there's a sort of linkage there. But there is this whole thing about doing $400 billion this year. We've crossed $300 billion of exports in the first 9 months. The China numbers just came out, hold your breath, $6 trillion of trade. Their exports this year for the first 9 months, for the year 2021 is 3.36 trillion. Imports are 2.69. So they are 40% over our GDP in terms of just trade. But you're saying focus more on domestic and not on exports. The Commerce Ministry is actually very bullish on that. The Prime Minister has spoken about that. Is there a contradiction there, or you're saying do both? I just want to understand that.
No, there is no contradiction. You see, the Commerce Ministry's job is industry and commerce. So the Commerce Ministry should be focused on boosting. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm saying that the budget is looking at the entire economy. And when I think about it, as the figures speak for themselves, right? That even if we double it, what impact will it have on our economy? It will be great for the Ministry of Commerce and those who are exporting. But it will be a drop in the ocean in our economy, right? Or maybe a bucket in the ocean. It may not be a drop.
More than a drop, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a great session. Thank you all, Mr. Gangopadhyay. Thank you for your time. I know that you're going to be very busy over the next couple of weeks before and after the budget. as you said, television channels and columns. We'd love to read that. I can sum this up, but I think you've said it all. I think your focus on job creation was really the bedrock of today's discussion, including youth and the fact that everybody has to be involved in the training and that industry should take responsibility of that, creating domestic demand. Nobody can argue with that. Domestic manufacturing. You talked about global supply chain being under pressure, and that is correct. With the US reducing the pressure on tariffs on China, I think that is a challenge, and India has to do more to get into the global supply chains for sure. It's not a cakewalk that we thought it would be 2 years ago, but it is something that India is totally focused on, and I hope we succeed there. You're right about focus on health, education, tourism. That is our subject. We can do whatever we want. There are no international issues there. Monetizing assets, invest in the youth. I see you're not a big fan of smart cities, rather of smart people. That came out quite clearly. Great question about, if health and education are state subjects, then why is urbanization, why is that sitting with Delhi? Your point on debt is well taken. And I think on FTAs, again, it's clear that you're not a big fan of multilateral, you're a big fan of multilateral trade agreements. Unfortunately, WTO is failing us. So everybody's turning to regional trade agreements, and now this spate of 6 or 7 FTAs that the government of India is pursuing, which seems as if we've tried that and now we're trying this. So, but you're spot on about the fact that the job creation is the center of all of this stuff. It will go really well. As public policy people here are not economists, we are going to quarrel with you on the issue of taxes should not be cut. I could never let that pass. I must protest on behalf of all my colleagues and those watching here today. And I seek excuse me, the economists need to excuse us for that. I think tax rationalization, but you've spoken about the fact that tariffs under FTA or no FTA need to look at rationalizing tariffs. Otherwise, you can't compete. You can't raise the cost. We get that point. So thank you so much. Great insight. We hope we will see much of this in the budget. We will know where we stand on the first. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Subha. Thank you, Anil, for, as always, running a riveting session with lots of questions and finishing on time. I see I am over time by a minute, so I'm going to say thank you.
So Virat, just before we close, Deepak, I have a commercial for PAFI. Deepak, can you please announce about our next dialogue?
Yeah. So our next dialogue is on Thursday next week, on 27th of January. This is going to be on the data protection. As we all know, last month on 16th of December, the Joint Parliamentary Committee has given its recommendations on the Data Protection Act, Bill 2021, that's what they are calling it now. And we have 2 MPs of Rajya Sabha joining us on that day, Dr. Anil Padmanabhan and Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi. This session will be from 11 to 12. However, I must add at this point of time that this particular session is going to be only for PAFI members and not open to public at large. Thank you.
So am I a PAFI member or not?
You are a PAFI honorary member.
Special invitee.
We are hoping between now and Thursday we'll get many people asking for membership.